doing this the way I have to do it. You know, with the internet connectivity being what it is because of COVID, it's such a challenge to make sure that you can actually stay on these Zoom calls. What works best for me in my community where I live is to go on the Alive network and to just go straight without any sort of internet using data. The challenge, though, is that the phone that I have with Alive is kind of old, and therefore I can't share screen from this particular phone. So I'm going to be showing you via this what it is that you should be looking for. So I hope that you guys can actually see that screen and you can therefore get this pertinent information that I am so happy to talk with you about today. All right, so today we're talking storytelling, okay? And our objectives are going to be quite simple. I want you to understand your story and why it's important. I want you to understand how to tell your story, and I want you to understand when to use your story to your advantage. And so those are our 3 objectives for today's session, and I hope you guys get to see that right there. Now, storytelling is everything. And as we go throughout this lesson today, you guys are going to see why I say that. You know, when I was in the 2nd grade, a lot happened that year. That was the year that my little brother was born. Just so many different things happened and transpired. And when I think about where I am now in life, and I think about the fact that I'm actually connected with the Ministry of Youth, because for 2 years I served as the youth ambassador to the Commonwealth. I had the opportunity to travel to Trinidad and to Barbados. I had the opportunity to travel to Dominica. I went all over the world and traveled to London, and I hosted an event in Egypt. In Uganda, I was asked to speak to the Commonwealth heads of foreign ministers, presenting our youth report to them on behalf of every young person in the Commonwealth. I got all of those opportunities through the Ministry of Youth, but my story before I got to that space in the Ministry of Youth is what actually led me to that space. You know, as I'm starting to tell you, when I was in 2nd grade, I remember it so clearly. It was a Tuesday morning, right around this time, because the weather had just started to change. I was sitting in Miss Tucker's class. This is my first period reading class. And I was sitting, I think, maybe between a girl named Paige and a guy named Perez. And we were in reading. And as I'm sitting down in this class, I start to fall asleep. Because I was tired, y'all. Your girl probably stayed up too late for a 7-year-old. I don't know what happened. But I was exhausted. And I remember resting my head down on the desk. And the next thing I know, Miss Tucker is standing over me, tapping on my shoulder and saying, "You, get up, stand to the front, read. You want to sleep in this class? You can read in this class." And I had to stand in front of everyone and read this story about this boy who was building this house in the woods. And I couldn't read the words in the paper. I couldn't read the words on the paper because I didn't know how to read well. And I just remember feeling so embarrassed as I stood up there in that moment. But after that moment had passed, I asked my dad if he could take me to the library. And that day I began a journey to becoming a reader. Today, I'm an author, right? So I go from a person that couldn't read the book to the person that writes books. And I'm able to do that because I took action after something that was a horrible moment. I'm always reminded about that because it blows my mind that I would have had the opportunity to, like I say, as a result of working with the Ministry of Youth, travel to Uganda, speak in front of ministers from around the world. And then because of what I did in Uganda, get the opportunity from the Commonwealth Secretariat in London to present to the International Coordination of Youth Organizations in Egypt. I mean, these were the things that God did and used me to do as a person who sat in my class in the 2nd grade and couldn't read in front of everybody because I couldn't understand the words on the paper. Like, anything is possible, right? And so, one, I hope you guys realize that was an example of storytelling, that I used the story about my experience in the 2nd grade to kind of lead into something, and that's what I want you to be able to do with your stories. But it's also important for you to understand that story because it was a formula and a format. And it's not something that I only me can do. Anybody can do it. You just need to understand how to do it and the tools that are necessary to build yourself up to use stories like that to convey messages, to convey important points. So again, we've got 3 objectives this morning: to understand why your story is important, to understand how to tell your story, and to understand when to tell your story. Those are going to be our objectives today. So the first objective, why your story is important. Excuse me for a little ghetto moment as I pull this forward and show you, once again, our points. So why your story is important. 1, self-development. T is going to be time preserved for future generations. O, orators are great leaders. R, right people, right opportunities. Why? Because you are needed. So if you ever wonder why your story is important, just remember STORY. So our first one is self-development. Why your story is important? Because S, it allows for your self-development. Whenever you get into the art of storytelling, you're going to first start by reflecting on yourself. And what I'm excited about is at the end of this presentation, I'm going to give you a link so that you can actually get a document that I call Unearthing Your Story, and it's going to help you to figure out some things that you can use as stories as you move forward. But what it allows you to do is reflect deeply. This has been a time, especially with COVID going on, I think, where many of us have had to reflect. Are we happy with where we are? Are we excited about what we're doing? You know, can we spend the rest of our lives living in a house with these people? Can we spend the rest of our lives living with ourselves? And so for many of us, this has been a forced time of self-reflection. But what stories do is they allow you to reflect on yourself, and they also allow you to figure out the best ways that you can be even better. Right? And so this is the power of looking back. This is the power of saying, this was a horrible moment for me. I felt ashamed in that moment when I stood up in front of my second grade class. I felt embarrassed in that moment when I stood up in front of my second grade class. And yet I'm grateful to my teacher. I'm not angry at my teacher for that moment, because in pushing me to stand up there and to tell a story, I could now stand in front of you. So again, storytelling is important for self-development because it allows us to reflect, to look back at some hard moments, and then to see the lessons that we've learned from them, and to be able to be grateful and operate in a space of gratitude for where we are now. So that's the first part of self-development. Storytelling also allows you self-development in that it helps you to build your confidence muscles, right? It takes a lot to be vulnerable. It takes a lot to push yourself to be able to share these things, right? Not everybody may want other people to know that they couldn't read when they were 7 years old. But for me, by being vulnerable, I get to push my confidence muscles. I get to challenge myself and see and realize that I have nothing to protect, nothing to defend, nothing to hide. That everything I've been through is an opportunity for me to impact someone else. And so what it does is it pushes me to be vulnerable. And in pushing me to be vulnerable, it also is therefore pushing me to be confident. Because I have to have courage in order to stand up and to stand in who I am and the messes that I've made and the way that I want to move forward. So it's another way that builds self-development in storytelling. And of course, it pushes you to build your elocution skills. If you're going to keep people engaged, whether that's on a Zoom call, like right now talking to each of you, or if that's in person, as you practice your storytelling more and more, you become more eloquent, you become more confident, and of course, people become more inclined to you because you're able to share so openly with who you are and therefore to connect with them. So storytelling is a great avenue for self-development, and self-development is critical if we want to continue to just push ourselves to be the best version possible. And of course, I talk about becoming the best version possible in the book that I wrote. Yes, me, who couldn't read when I was 7. It's called A to Z to the Best Me, so you can always check that out as well for some more of your self-development needs. The next thing that storytelling allows us to do is T, right? That's time preserved for future generations. And this one is pretty cool. And I want to share this, my ghetto version of sharing screens again, right? And it says, time preserved for future generations. We've learned history through storytelling, first orally and then through writing. And we get to tell our stories and therefore create legacies from our perspective. Now, this is important. And I've listed here 3 things that I think are pretty funny, but are also pretty true regarding whose side of the story you hear. You know, they always say there are 3 sides to every story: his side, her side, and what actually happened. But storytelling allows you to create and write your own legacy. If you don't tell your story, people will tell your story for you, right? And so 3 of the things I have here that are reminders of what I've shared is 1, the Diary of Anne Frank, which was just a diary a girl was keeping and now was considered one of the best known literature pieces on the Holocaust. 2, the Great Columbus Debate. I don't know if any of you got to see the president's message on what used to be Columbus Day in the Bahamas and is now National Heroes Day, but it talked about how we were rewriting his legacy by calling him an oppressor. And so from one side, he's a great Italian American that shows the power of what can be done when you discover and explore. And from the sides of the enslaved peoples and Native Americans, he's a great destroyer, right? And so it comes down to the side of the story that you want told. If he had been writing in his own words, which we don't know that he did, other than some captain's logs, but if we'd had journals about his perspective, his viewpoint, then maybe we'd have a better and clearer understanding on how he wanted his story to be told. Right now, we can only tell the story from the side of those that believe he was a victor and those that believe that he led to the detriment of many victims. So it's interesting there. And then this one I love, Netflix. I saw a friend of mine on Facebook complaining about this the other day, asking how is it that Netflix can claim that certain shows that have existed long before they made their way to Netflix. And guys, this is my daughter, Cairo, who is behind me because this is my life as a mom and a mom working from home. But please excuse Cairo. But as I was saying, so Netflix determines, even if it's re-airing a show that might have had a previous season, it sometimes calls it a Netflix original. In 40 years, when the show is only on Netflix and not on the original network, who was the rightful owner, right? It's all about the story that you tell. So what we want to do with our storytelling is just to preserve our time. One of the things I encourage people to do, even as an act of self-development, is to journal. And so in my book, I ask specific questions related to different letters of the alphabet for characteristics that I think help to make us the best version of ourselves. And in that journal, I ask you to write down things because journaling really helps to grow and to develop you as a person. Guys, I want you to excuse me 1 second. I just need to get out of the camera. You have to go inside, baby. Okay? Thank you, sweetie. Sorry about that, mom life. So yes, I ask you to journal because journaling really, really helps you both from a physical perspective to be physically well, but also from an emotional perspective to clear your thoughts and your processes. And so one of the things that you can do is you try to tell your stories just to journal. And if you're journaling, write about these times, write about COVID, write about the numbers each day, write about how you feel about all of that, right? You're just trying to build a muscle of being able to tell stories, and you can never know or imagine where that may go, including ending up in something like the Diary of Anne Frank. But the point of this is that you need to preserve time for you and for future generations. What do you want your kids to know about you? What do you want your grandkids to know about you? What do you want future generations to know about you? And do you want that story told from somebody else's perspective or your own? And if it is that you want that story told from your perspective so you can control the narrative, then it is incredibly important that you start to use storytelling. All right, so the next thing that we're going to take a look at is storytelling from the point of the letter O in story. And this one here says orators and leaders, right? All great leaders were excellent orators. And so it's important for us to understand that even from a leadership perspective, we want to be using stories, right? How we do that is quite simple. If it is that you are looking for a promotion in your current workspace, if you're looking to promote yourself in any way at all, more importantly, if you're looking for respectability among your peers, this is how you use storytelling. All LinkedIn is, and all LinkedIn has allowed people to do, is to be able to get some more respectability from their peers based on a series of things. So in LinkedIn, people get to leave testimonials about you. They get to say what they know you for. You also got to share articles and give credit to yourself for certain accomplishments and achievements. All that is a form of storytelling online that allows people to give you credibility. So I know that I can look at you as a master, for example, in this master course, based on things you said about yourself. So if you want to be seen as the leader in something, as the visionary in something, as somebody really offering something special, you want to get in front of an audience and you want to tell stories. You want to share your story, because the more that you do that, the more credible you seem, the more leadership-like you are. Great orators, great leaders, one and the same. And so you want to make sure that you are using storytelling as a powerful orator and therefore a powerful leader. So the R in story for why storytelling is important is going to be right people, right opportunities. Ooh, love that one. Let me tell you why. I remember being the president of the student union at the College of the Bahamas several years ago. As a part of that, I sat on the college council. So as a member of the college council, you have to attend graduation. This was pre-COVID. And you sat on the stage. And I remember sitting on this stage for graduation. My seat was right next to a wonderful lady, but I didn't want to sit next to her. And it was no fault of her own. It was all me. And it's because in our country and in our world, particularly if you are a person of color, you can sometimes feel, without knowing it consciously, less than other people, right? And so this was an older, refined white woman. And quite frankly, I've not always had spaces to interact with people of her color, you know, and you don't realize until you're in a moment like that one that these divides exist or how they can play on your psyche. And I don't know how many of you can agree with me, and feel free to type in chat YANA, which means you are not alone, or understood from Amber, you know, like that we sometimes feel limited by who we are, but we don't even know that until we put in a situation where we have to push ourselves to the next level. So I didn't want to sit next to this lady, nothing to do with her, everything to do with me and my own insecurities. And we can feel that way sometimes. We can be insecure, we can be uncertain, we don't know if what we're going to say is going to sound stupid. And again, this wasn't even at my conscious forefront. I just know I'm sitting next to her, what I could talk about, right? That's my thought process, simple. Anyway, I sit next to her, and thank goodness for a mom that taught me that manners take you around the world. And so my mom always say good morning and good afternoon. And so even though I was not in a comfortable position, I did what I'd been taught to do. And so I said to her, good morning, how are you doing? And she just fully engaged me in conversation. She wanted to talk. And guess what? The thing about talking is all you have to do is respond, right? You listen, you answer. And as she and I spoke, she asked me a very honest question. What was I going to do when I was done UB? I was finishing my associates at the time. And I was able to say to her, listen, I would love to go off to university. I've gotten into several. I just don't know if I'm going to have the funding to go off. So quite frankly, I really don't know what I'm going to do. And in that moment, I was completely honest, completely transparent, completely vulnerable with my truth, with my story. And I said to her, I don't know what I'm going to do because I just don't have the funds to go. And she said to me, and I will never forget this moment for the rest of my life. This is one of the stories I always tell because it shows how powerful God is and how powerful human connection is and how God works through people. She said to me, oh, not to worry. Just send me your CV. I'll pay for you to go to school. And this woman had a client that had a specific scholarship program or something along those lines for young women, and was able to get me funding to go off to the University of Miami. $60,000 a year was my tuition. And in that time, I was able to get my bachelor's degree. I met President Bill Clinton. I was able to study abroad in Spain and travel Europe for a month thereafter. All of this happened because of a conversation where I was honest and shared my story. I was in the right place with the right opportunity, and I had the confidence level to take myself into a position to share my story. Even with all those insecurities, even with that fear of sitting next to her, I was honest and able to share, and the right opportunity came my way. So now that I'm older, and I'm not looking for scholarships or anything like that, but now that I'm older and I want to just engage with people, I want to connect with people, I want to make sure that I am sharing things about myself and with the people that I need to connect to me. So here's the beauty in our storytelling. The more comfortable we are in who we are, the more we can walk in that area and draw the right people to us. Not everybody's going to like you. Not everybody's going to like your story, and that's fine. But if it is that you are connecting with the people meant for you, man, magical things can happen. So remember that the R and why do I tell my story is right people, right opportunities. Because one, it draws people that want what you have to offer. Ghetto version of this. Draws people with what they want that you may have to offer. Wait, sorry guys, got up. And two, it leads to impact and influence rather than just popularity. A lot of people want to be popular, right? So we have this online culture now, and it's all about the likes, it's all about the followers. But what's the point in getting likes and what's the point in getting followers if it doesn't lead to profit? And so I always say profit over popularity. And you get profit over popularity when you have impact. The point is, though, that the more you become better at telling your story, the more opportunities you have for financial benefits. So the next thing that we're going to talk about in our storytelling, we've done S, we've done T, we've done O, we've done R, and so that ends with the letter Y. And the why in storytelling and why it's important for you to tell your story is because you are needed in the world. And I'm so serious about that. You in particular, your story is needed in the world. The Bible tells us that there is nothing new under the sun. And that means that there's nothing happening with you that hasn't happened to someone before. As a matter of fact, as I mentioned the Bible, I think about some of the greatest stories ever told, right? And they're included in there. And we use them as reference points all the time. We're having a hard time. We're going through something. We look back in there and say, well, if this person made it, then so can I. Even now, as we go through COVID, and the young woman that introduced me, who's so phenomenal, talked about some of the things that she's learned this week just from those teaching these masterclasses alone. And all of them were sharing and saying things that you could connect to because you were going through it. We've all been going through COVID together. It is a group trauma, and all of us doing our best to get by. And so with that being said, remember that your story, something that happened to you, something that you've gone through, is not just for you. It's to lift somebody else up at a time when they are in desperate need of it, man. You are the light in the world in this moment of darkness. And even though you may not be able to see it, the more you stand in your authentic truth, the more you're willing to share your story, the more the rest of us see it, and the more the rest of us need it. So I want you to remember that the why in why should I tell my story is you are needed in the world. So I love this quote from Marianne Williamson. I think it's one that most people have heard before, but I'm going to just share an exact part of it that I really think is critical to this part of our conversation. And it says, we are all meant to shine as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. And that is what your story does for you. That is why you're needed in the world, because it's not just about you. It's about all the people whose lives are depending on you to share your truth. All right, so we've kind of covered our first objective, which is why your story is necessary. And now we get to cover our second point, and that is the good stuff. How to tell your story. Woo. How to tell your story. Okay, so remember earlier on, I told you 2 stories already. I told you a story about me in the 2nd grade, my not being able to read. I told you a story about me and this awesome woman who ended up providing the opportunity for me to go to university, and how scared and fearful I was even before she and I got connected. I told you those things, and now I'm going to tell you how I did it. There were certain similarities in both of those, and you wouldn't have noticed them before. But now that I'm going to give you all the tea, you guys are going to be able to figure out how I tell my stories, even with my social media posts. All right, so somebody type in chat so I know y'all still with me. All the tea, all the tea. Put all the tea in chat so that I know that I am not alone talking to myself, and that there is someone paying attention to all this good I'm about to give out. Thank you, Charlie. Yes, Valentino, all the tea. All right, so the first thing you want to do when you tell your story, thanks, Denisha, is you want to determine, what do I want the end result of this to be? I'm coming into this situation, what do I want the end result to look like? So for me, in every aspect of my life, hey, Hervanique, you want to make sure that you begin with the end in mind. And with storytelling, that's critical. So I knew that as I got into this conversation with you this morning, what my 3 objectives were. Before you left today, I knew that I wanted you to understand how important you telling your story was and how it helps with self-development. I knew that I wanted you to understand the way that you tell a story, so how you tell a story, and that's what we're getting into now. And I knew that I wanted you to understand when your story was most appropriate to be told. So those were what I began with the end in mind. So for you, when you start to craft stories, I want you to say, okay, I'm going to give this presentation. What do I want the end result to be, right? And this here, go and ghetto again, guys. Forgive your girl. My version of screen share breaks it down. Determine what you want the end result to be. That's what we said up there. Are you hoping to inform, motivate, inspire, or transform? Always name at least 3 things you want people to walk away with. Always name at least 3 things you want people to walk away with. Because once you can start there, then you've got a guide and you know what direction you're moving in. So that's very, very important. The second thing, after you've already determined, I want people to come away with these 3 things. I want them to be inspired as a result of this, and this is what I want them to know. So you're always going to inform people, but the way that you do that may be different, right? Information is what they're always going to leave with. So I told you the 3 things I wanted you to leave with, but how I do that is going to be different. So maybe motivation, and there'll be sections of this where I motivate you and I encourage you. Then there's inspiration, where I talk to you about the fact that God used this woman who looks so different from me, who I didn't even know I was insecure about, to come and bless me in such a magnificent way, right? And that's inspirational because it gives you the, oh, that's so awesome feeling, right? And then there's the transformational piece, where you decide that it's not just about me and how I inspired you, or it's not just that I had a good moment, but that you had a great one too, right? And so you get to determine, what do I want the tone of this to be? What is the takeaway that I want? That's the first step. The second step, as you try to tell this story, as you craft this story, is that I want you to pull out the star in you. And what do I mean by that? A lot of us, especially in our country, don't believe in shining. We believe that it's bad to be big. We believe it's bad to be out there and for people to know how great we are. We've been taught almost this idea of a false sense of humility, right? That you shouldn't take your roses before you die. It's almost like, people always say, what are you supposed to do when people sing happy birthday to you? I feel so awkward because I have all this attention on me. No, boo, you're supposed to smile. You're supposed to say, hey, happy birthday to me. It's supposed to be all of these positive vibes because people are celebrating you. But we're so not used to being celebrated, and we're so often taught to say, oh, no, I didn't do that. No, that's, all God, right? Which is good because I give God all the credit all the time, right? But I realize that God is using me because I'm submitting my will to him, because I want to walk in his steps, that he has the power to move through me because of what I'm doing, right? But we often try to just push everything under the rug, or we have this other bad mind, and I'm calling it bad mind because that's what it is. We believe that if people know the good things happening in our life, somehow people will have the power to destroy us. So we don't want people to know the good things going on, because then it's like, oh, child, well, she could work one little thing in the background, or if people know too much about you, they ain't support you. See, it's all in the negative. And I'm not saying that these things don't happen, but what I'm saying is that there are always more for us than against us. More people counting on us than those counting us out, And so if we would stay in that space of, it's not about me, it's about the people I'm trying to help, then we could remove ourselves from being afraid to shine. Because when you shine in, you don't have time for the shadows. Let people stay in the shade, that's on them. But the people who need your light will see your light. So I want to help you to pull out that star in you. And pulling out the star in you is important because it gives you credibility. So what we do, whenever I tell a story, I always talk about something that's very good. So in my first story, where I talked about me being in the second grade, I said something along the lines of, it's just so amazing that I've been able to write a book when I couldn't read. So now I'm an author. So an author gives me a certain level of authority because I've written something, I've published something, people have read what I've said. So now I have a level of authority. That's big. And then I can say to you, but I would not have known that I would be able to publish a book because I couldn't read in the second grade. And you see what that does there? Now I'm not sounding like, I'm so cocky, I write all these books, as much as I did a great thing, but before I got to this great thing, I had this low point. See what I did there? And I did it too when I talked about being the president for the student union. I said to you, I was president of the student union. I got to sit on this college council. I was sitting next to this outstanding woman with so many accolades. But yet I felt, and I talked to you about all the negative things I feel about myself that happened in that moment. And I share with you that even though I'm sitting at this space, I still don't have any money to go to school. The low part of me would not have mattered if I hadn't already said the authority that I already had, which is the big part of me. So I'm going to show you how to do the low part. The low part is easy. We could talk about our problems all the time. It's the big part. It's the emphasizing, this is what I've been blessed with. This is what I've been given. This is how I've used my talents. We need to be able to pull that out of you. So whenever I tell stories, there's a big part of me. And there's always going to be a big part of you too with whatever story you choose. So you want to pull out the details that make you unique and special or shine in some way. You want to use large numbers to make your point. I often tell another story about how, I would serve when I was small. My parents would give my sister and I leftover dinner to take to school the next day, right? Save them money. They couldn't always afford to buy us lunch from the lunch menu. But one of the things that I loved that my mom would make was chicken wings, because you could eat. Somehow I ate them cold. I don't know, what the protocol is on that now from a health perspective. But my sister and I would share our chicken wings in our foil paper, and we'd be so happy because we had to ask what was a delicious meal, and it was what we could afford. We didn't know any better, and so we were fine. And so it's just crazy to me that I would go from eating cold chicken wings wrapped in foil paper to serving over 1 million guests each year at Atlantis, the same chicken in a fancier foil paper. So you see what I did there, right? I used something called a large number. So when I say over 1 million guests, and that was incorrect of me, it would not have been 1 million. Certainly I would have served a couple 100,000 in my time with that company. But by using a number, I give a quality and a quantity to something that is big. So it's not that I have to be big all the time, because maybe I've not won an award, or I've not been in a position of leadership, but I might have been a part of a team that was in leadership. So as a part of the Atlantis team, I would have served over 300,000 guests in a year. And so you want to use things that are credible to you. If you work with the Ministry of Youth, as a result of the work that you do with the Ministry of Youth, you've impacted the lives of over 400,000 teenagers in the Bahamas over the past 20 years. You see? And so you have been involved in that. That's a big you. So a part of storytelling, you need to be able to pull out the bigness in you. 2 ways that you can do that. Pull out details that are unique or special, any types of awards, etc., that you might have won. Use a large number from somewhere. Again, over the past 20 years, we've served over 400,000 young people in the Bahamas. And then finally, you want to focus on a particular characteristic that will tie into the overarching story. So if it is that you're talking about the need for volunteer work, you may want to say, I volunteered over 80 hours with the Red Cross. And in that way, I'm using a number, 80 hours, and my volunteerism, which is a positive characteristic. And that may come up later on in another story. Okay, no time is going really quickly, so I want to move it right along. So then after you've talked about you and pulled out that big you, remember I showed you how I went down and showed you what we call the valley, or something that was a low point in my life? So now you want to find the moment. So what was the moment for you? In the stories that I've shared with you already, the moment was standing up in front of the room to read and not being able to. The moment was sitting next to this lady on a stage and being afraid. The moment was sitting there and unwrapping that chicken in the foil paper and being grateful and not knowing any different. But then all of a sudden, years later, I would come to do so much more with foil paper and chicken. So it could be a simple moment. It could be the moment that you were sitting at a traffic light. It could be the moment that you gave birth to your child, which is a little less simple. It could be the moment that you came to this masterclass and something went off in your mind. What is the moment? So then you find a moment, choose a moment, and a moment can be a low point that taught you a lesson, or it can be something major that was major for you. And then once you found this moment, I want you to write about all the moments surrounding it. So when I told you my story about not being able to read at 7, I talked to you about how I knew it was around this time of year because it was getting cold and it was in the morning. It was my first period class and that's why I was so tired. I was able to set a stage for you so you could see it for yourself what I was talking about. So even as you pick whatever moment it is that you're going to tell the story around, I want you to be able to tell me what the atmosphere was like so that I could see it with you. When I taught you about sitting on the stage, if I wanted to stretch that some more, I would say, we were in the Bahamas Diplomatic Center Hall and, the room expanded so largely. There were chairs all around us. And as we sat in this elevated place, and I could still remember the way the soft blue cushion rubbed against the back of my knee. See, and so now I'm giving you more descriptions about what's happening around me so you can put yourself in the story too. But find a moment. That was the next point. The fourth and final point is after you've already figured out what your 3 points were that you want to make at the end of this, after you've already figured out how to bring out you and your bigness, after you've chosen the moment that you were brought low, what is the lesson that you learned? So for me, I told you how after I had that moment where I couldn't read, that transformed me into wanting to be a reader. I went to the library the same day. I took an action step, right? And because of that, I became an avid reader. Because I became an avid reader, I could have articulate conversations. And because I could have articulate conversations, it led me to start my work with the Ministry of Youth. And that led me to travel the world. It led me to meet that lady on stage and talk to her. And that led to me getting university education, right? And so all of these things happened as a result of that. What is the lesson that we're going to take from this moment that you share with us? Very, very simple process. Tell me who you are and the best of you. Take me down low with you so you are humanized to me, and I know that you and I are the same. You are not a god, even though you're great. You've had good moments, but you've also had low points. And now that you've had that low point, bring me back out again. Tell me what lesson it is that I can learn from you. Share the lesson. All right, so we've talked about why telling your story is important, and we used STORY for that. We've talked about how you tell your story, and I gave you 4 steps to that. Begin with the end in mind. Make sure that you pull out the star in you and you shine brightly. Then you choose a moment that was really low for you, and then finally you share the lesson. And so those were the 4 parts of how to tell a story. And now, why do you tell a story? When to tell it? When to tell your story? So when do you tell your story? All the time. I mean, not all the time, because I hate to break it to you all, right? But ain't nobody want to help but you like every second, every day. I know. But you could love yourself like that, and that's fine. That's encouraged. That's self-development to love yourself like that every day. But you share your story as often as possible, right? But you want to be intentional about how you share this story. Incredibly intentional, and you can use these types of tips I'm giving you, especially when it's time to sell yourself. And this could be in person, and so you're going on a job interview, and so they ask you, are you willing to work 24-hour shifts? Now, y'all, please be actually willing to work 24-hour shifts. If you're not, then don't get into Garrett for that, because that's what it calls for. They told you that in the beginning. But if it is that you're willing to do it, you can say to them, I am so passionate about working. I do not mind working 24-hour shifts. As a matter of fact, I do remember a time when I had to be called in because an employee couldn't make it, and I was on vacation, but I decided to come in for that day just to help the company out because I was so passionate about the work they were doing, right? And so that's a story. You just told the story. You just shared a high point that you were off, a low point that somebody got sick and you had to get called in, and then maybe you could even share a lesson and say, and so this is what I learned from that experience and giving myself of that time, right? Now, if you're not actually willing to come in on vacation, don't use that story example. But the point is that if you want to share a story in some sort of way to get you a promotion or to promote yourself, then you definitely want to do that. I actually use a lot of storytelling on social media, and so I have a pretty good social media size following. I've got just a little over 13,000 followers, and every time, for the most part, I share stories in my post because it allows me to connect to my followers in a more meaningful way. And I became intentional about sharing my stories when I had about 800 followers, and I moved from 800 to 13,000. That's in the last year. So be very, 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 very confident in the sharing of your stories, and even use them to tell your social media posts. Thank you so much, Lincoln. And of course, you can use that same formula I just did. So if you read my post and you look for it intentionally, you'll see where I share something that was a low point for me, or that was a challenge for me. And then I use another method that I teach in my courses, where I connect that story to you. And so I say to you, when I was in, and I did it earlier, when I was in the second grade and I couldn't read, and I stood there that day and I just felt so embarrassed and so ashamed. Have any of you ever felt embarrassed or ashamed in front of a group of peers? Right? I'll say something like, I'm not the only one that would have felt that has stood in front of a room and been ashamed. We've all been there. We've all had that moment when we stood up and somebody asked us to tell them something and we just didn't know the answer. Have you ever felt ashamed or embarrassed? And so what I did was talk about me first, then I talked about us as a collective, and then I talked about you, the individual, right? And that is a method of storytelling. I use it in my social media posts all the time. I talk about a low point. I bring you into the low point with me, and then I talk about how you and I can both get out of the low point, which is kind of like the lesson learned. So again, you can use it in your social media promotion. You can use it to sell your products. I once coached a woman who was going to an international entrepreneurship conference, and she had the opportunity to pitch her product. She was selling ice cream. And I asked her, what's your connection to ice cream? She said she found out that years ago, her grandmother made ice cream in front of the family tree. So we talked about that in a story, and we said that she never would have imagined that as an entrepreneur who once taught children with deficiencies how to learn, that she would be helping to teach people how to love flavors and to enjoy life through ice cream. She never could have imagined that it would connect her to her great-grandmother who brewed strawberry ice cream from scratch in the backyard, right? And so that helped her to sell the product. So you want to use stories even in selling your products. And then finally, you want to use them in your professional presentations. So last year, I gave a presentation on being camera confident and how to appear confident on camera. And so there were some points that I knew I wanted to make. Again, I began with the end in mind. What do I want people to get from this speech? And I said, okay, I want them to know how to dress for camera. I want them to remember that they're connecting with people every time they look into the eyes of the camera. And so for that story, I talked about when my dad died and the items that were left in his bag. And one of them was a chain, right? And so that chain for me was a reminder of how we connect to each other, but also how to dress, right? That my dad always looked nice and he looked the part. So I need to make sure that I look appropriate whenever I come on camera. So again, and that was a content-based speech, a speech on information, making sure that people could leave knowing how to appear confident on camera, but I used a story as a guideline to tell it. So you get to use stories whenever you want to. So finally, I just want to end with this. This is a song from Emily Sandé that I absolutely loved. It's called Read All About It, Part 2. And I can't sing. I won't try. God gave me the ability to speak well, but singing is not it. And you got to know your strengths, people. Can I get an amen in chat, please? It says, you've got the words to change a nation, but you're biting your tongue. You spent a lifetime stuck in silence, afraid you'll say something wrong. But if no one ever hears you, then how they're going to learn your song? So come on. You've got a heart as loud as lightning, so why let your voice be tamed? Maybe we're a little different. There's no need to be ashamed. You've got the light to fight the shadows, so stop hiding it away. Come on and tell your story. All right, so that's going to be it for me today, but I do have time for some questions and answers, so we're going to get to that. I do want to just show you my ghetto screen, my version of sharing screens. If you go right there, and I hope you guys can see that, it just tells you where you can get a download from me. I've actually created a PDF, and I also, since you didn't get to see this presentation visually, I want to be able to share it with you. So if you email me, my email is Anastarcia, that's AnastarciaHuyler@gmail.com. If you email me, AnastarciaHuyler@gmail.com. And it is Anastasia, guys. This is where I have to emphasize the name. I can't go with Anastasia because the R is important in the email. AnastarciaHuyler@gmail.com. Or quicker than that, easier than that, simply go to my Instagram page, Home of Stars. Hit the like button if you're there, the follow button. But if not, you can just click the link in my bio. You'll see a thing that says link in bio. If you click that, there is something there that says unearth your story. It is a guideline that I will email to you. Once I've gotten your email, I will email it to you, and it will help you to just begin to figure out the pieces of putting your story together. Once I get that email from you, I can also make sure that I send you this presentation so that you have it in full effect. It has been such a pleasure chatting with you all today. I hope you remember the things that we talked about with telling your story. Remember why it is so important that you share your story with the world. Remember that S is going to be because it helps with self-development. T is for time, preserved for future generations. O, orators are great leaders, and of course that is in you. R, right people, right opportunities. Show me the money. And of course, why you are needed. So that's why you need to tell your story. Of course, I hope you remember there are 4 ways that you can make that actually happen. 1, you want to begin with the end in mind. 2, you want to make sure that you are pulling out that star in you. 3, choose a moment, just one moment. Focus on that moment and give me all the details about it. And then 4, what is the lesson learned? Hi guys, I really hope you enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to just seeing some great stories coming forth. Looking forward to seeing you guys walk more in your light, walk more in your authenticity, and knowing how powerful you are. And if there are any questions, I am ready to take them now.